I think that the white supremacist issue, it was very obvious that it was a terrorist attack. And I think that President Donald Trump should have made a statement earlier addressing the fact and making sure all Americans feel safe in this country. That is the #1 issue right now.
Yes, well, she didn't win the crown, but she sure did break the internet. Miss Texas, Margana Wood, called out Trump on race on Sunday. The next day, ESPN's Jemele Hill also called out the president in a series of tweets, calling him a white supremacist. Two women in the spotlight, two similar actions, but the White House went after only one. Back with me is MSNBC political contributor Jason Johnson, and joining the panel is journalist and former NFL player Dante Stallworth, as well as NBC senior media editor Claire Atkinson and Charlie Pierce of Sports Illustrated and Esquire. Thank you guys for being here. I'm going to go to the newer panelists first. And Dante, I'll start with you. What was your reaction to ESPN's reaction? Let's first look at the tweets that Jemele sent out on Monday. This is 6 for my producers. She tweeted, Donald Trump is a white supremacist who has largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. The height of white privilege is being able to ignore his white supremacy because it's of no threat to you. Well, it's a threat to me. Trump is the most ignorant, offensive president of my lifetime. His rise is a direct result of white supremacy, period. Then ESPN's reaction to that was to attempt to sort of remove her off the air and then not have her show up for her show until her black colleague came in and said, wait, whoa, 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 that's not going to happen. But what was your reaction both to her tweet and to ESPN's reaction?
I know Jemele personally, and I thought she was very courageous for being able to say, hey, I'm going to speak out regardless of what the condemnation is going to be, what the backlash is going to be. She felt that she needed to speak up because a lot of people, kind of like what Colin Kaepernick did, a lot of people don't have that voice. So one of the things that people, I think, took offense to this is that when we envision the word white supremacist, we think of slavery, we think of Jim Crow, we think of skinheads, or we think of KKK robes. And that's not necessarily the full extent of what white supremacy is. And until we can actually come to terms and understand that truth, we won't be able to move forward in this country. And
as a former NFL player yourself, yes, this is that Dante Stallworth that we have on the air with us today. Is there a lot of pressure in professional sports to be politically neutral because obviously the fan base comes from all sides of the political spectrum?
Yeah, I think that's something that's happened from the very beginning. And when you look at the basketball great Michael Jordan, I want to be like Mike, right? Everybody loved being like Mike, but Mike said that Democrats and Republicans both buy his shoes, so he was going to stay away from politics because it was in his best interest of his bottom line. So players naturally don't want to anger fans. You know, but sometimes if you don't speak out, then that's what you're doing.
And Charlie Pierce, typically TV personalities don't want to anger anybody either because people want a broad audience. But if you think about former television personalities and the things that they have said in a racial vein, let's talk about a guy named Donald Trump, who back in 2007 was on an NBC Universal show, an NBC Entertainment show called The Apprentice. And he tweeted that Obama is a total racist. He said Obama 07 speech, which Daily Caller just released, not only shows that Obama is a racist, but how the press always covers for him. You also had Glenn Beck, who had a TV show. And this is Glenn Beck, who at the time was on a television show, also calling the president a racist. Take a listen.
This president, I think, has exposed himself as a guy over and over and over again who has a deep-seated hatred for white people or the white culture. I don't know what it is. I'm not saying that he doesn't like white people. I'm saying he has a problem. This guy is, I believe, a racist.
And so, Charlie, there was no call from the President of the United States, and the first tweet, the tweet from Trump was in 2012, I should say, October 2012. It was not from 07, it was from 2012, obviously. There was no call from the White House press room for Donald Trump to be fired from The Apprentice. There was no call for Glenn Beck to be fired, at least not from the White House. There were lots of people who wanted him fired, but it wasn't from the White House. What do you make of this?
Well, obviously, Jemele had 2 strikes against her. She's an African-American and she's a woman, which neither Donald Trump nor Glenn Beck are. The double standard is so obvious as to actually beg her explanation. Everybody knows why. And to go back to the original comparison you made, everybody knows why he went after an ESPN personality and not Ms. Texas. So the one thing I would have to say, and maybe Dante can back me up on this, is for some reason the NFL has managed not to step all over itself in this controversy. They've managed to avoid a PR disaster for the first time in 3 years.
Dante?
Yeah, that's true.
Agree.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Jason, it does feel like we're at this moment where Donald Trump is saying and doing things that are unprecedented. The Charlottesville reaction is something that even shocked some Republicans and said, wait a minute, this was like a layup to say that Nazis are bad.
Right, you would think.
Right?
Yeah.
But if that's happening, right, then how can the same, conservatives hold on to outrage when somebody like Jemele Hill reacts to that?
Well, that's the thing. I think there's a general dishonesty about when we have discussions of race, right? And this fits with this football narrative. We are, and Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals and everything, we criticize the NFL. We say, Jerry Jones, how can you hire men who've beaten women and shot women and raped women and everything else like that? We hold NFL owners accountable for the people they hire. Jemele Hill is just applying that same logic to Trump. She's saying, hey, look, you've hired white supremacists, and I'm holding you accountable for that. But because she's a black woman, because this administration is triggered whenever a black woman says something, she is being held accountable in an unrealistic way. And I think that no one wants to be honest about that because it's much easier to attack her and to say, oh, she was out of line, et cetera, than to say, look, he's just as bad as anybody else who hires terrible people.
Yeah, and Claire, this also became a story about sort of unequal power, right? Asymmetrical power when the White House is actually attacking an individual journalist. Luckily, we didn't want them to go after Ms. Texas. They didn't luckily go after her. But this is Sarah Huckabee Sanders from the White House podium as she's communications director as press secretary on Friday.
ESPN has been hypocritical. They should hold anchors to a fair and consistent standard. ESPN suspended a longtime anchor, Linda Cohn, not too long ago for expressing a political viewpoint.
Do you still stand by your statement of the other day when you said that what Jemele Hill did was a fireable offense?
I do.
Just as a media matter, Claire, the idea of the White House calling for an individual journalist to be fired, your thoughts?
I mean, it is pretty surprising, and I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders is going to be censured for that to some extent. But I think when I first heard about this issue, I kind of raised my eyebrows and said, ESPN again? There's something every week, it seems, with suspensions and firings of folks who do things wrong. And I think it's kind of interesting that they've really have backed Jemele Hill in this. John Skipper, who runs the organization, issued a memo saying, hey guys, this is a sports organization, not a political organization. Keep that in mind. But we're living in an era where everybody feels very strongly about politics, and you can't separate it from your job or from being a sports announcer. And you look at Donald Trump's business council of CEOs. The owner of ESPN is Disney. The CEO of Disney stepped down from Donald Trump's business council after he said he was pulling out of the climate change accord. And so if even the CEOs are speaking out about politics and making their views known, I think it's very hard for organizations to argue, our employees need to keep silent and not use the platform when clearly a lot of big business people are. And I just throw out also, like the CEO of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, has been very vocal about his criticisms of Trump on Twitter. He's talked about how's Infrastructure Week going after he came back from China. And so, we're in an era where people want to talk about how they feel politically, from the Rockettes not wanting to play the inauguration to Jemele Hill feeling she has a civic duty to voice her feelings on Twitter.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, Charlie Pierce Esquire has gotten political. Vogue has gotten political. Teen Vogue has gotten political. It's very hard to argue that ESPN is the one place that would be exempt, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, I would argue that going back to Harold Hughes Esquire has been, contained an enormous amount of political content. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that's going on here, and this is something that I have a little bit of unfortunate experience with, is that when we handed journalism over to the bean counters, and it became more important to have your stock options than to keep faith with your employees. They developed a culture of not making waves. Back when I started, if you were a newspaper and your reporters did not make trouble for you, your reporters got fired. Now, if the reporters make trouble for you, they get fired. There are literally ethics codes that forbid you from speaking out on your own personal social media accounts. Yeah. And of course, this all has a lot to do with the fact that we don't really have organized labor in this country either. Yeah. So you have nobody with your back. And I thought that John Skipper's statement was disgraceful. I thought it was a betrayal. I mean, it's one thing if you want to discipline your employee, but once the White House comes after you, you get your behind your employee, and you are stubborn.
Yeah. You're getting an amen here from Jason really quickly.
I completely agree, and it was something you mentioned at the very beginning, Joy. And credit not just to Jemele, but credit to all the people who had her back at ESPN, because if the network wouldn't do it, everybody else did, and they said, look, we're not going on without her. Credit to all of them.
That's exactly right, because they tried to put two different people on, and they said, not going to happen.
We're not playing this.
This has been a lot of fun to talk to you guys. Jason Johnson, Dante Stallworth, Claire Atkinson, Charlie Pierce. Thank you guys very much. And coming up at the top of the hour,